My parents loved only my brother, the golden child. I was earning money for my business idea and collected $37,000. When I told my family about it, my brother stole the money for his own idea. I've been struggling with this for years, and honestly, I just need to get it off my chest. I don't know where else to go. So here I am, spilling my guts to a bunch of strangers on the internet. I'm 26 now, but this story really starts much earlier, probably when I was a kid. I'm the second child in my family. My older brother, Jason, is the golden child. You know the type. Everything he does is praised. He gets whatever he wants, and nothing ever seems to be his fault. I, on the other hand, have always been the responsible one, the kid who had to grow up way too fast. The difference between how our parents treat us is like night and day. Jason is 2 years older than me, and I remember, even when we were little, how my parents would dote on him. He got the best toys, the most attention, and all the support in the world. I guess it didn't bother me too much back then. I was too young to really understand what was happening. But looking back, it was always there. The favoritism. Fast forward to when I was 15, and that's when things really started to take shape. Jason, by this point, had already established himself as the laid-back, charming guy who could do no wrong. He didn't lift a finger around the house. If there was a chore to be done, it was always, "Oh, Liam can do it." I remember being told to do Jason's laundry while he was out with friends, and when I complained, my mom would say, "He's busy. He has a lot on his plate. Just help out, would you?" Busy? Jason? The guy who spent all day playing video games and going out with friends? Meanwhile, I had started working part-time at the local grocery store, trying to save up money for my future. I had big dreams back then. I wanted to start my own business someday, something that would allow me to get out of that house and make a name for myself. I started putting money aside, little by little, and over the years, I managed to save up $37,000. It wasn't easy, though. I had to miss out on a lot of stuff. Parties, trips, even small things like going out for pizza with friends, just to keep saving. And where was Jason during all of this? Well, after high school, he decided college wasn't for him. Fine, I guess that's not for everyone. But instead of working or figuring out his life, he just coasted. My parents, of course, were more than happy to support him. He lived rent-free, and when he wanted to go on a road trip with his buddies, my dad handed him $500 like it was no big deal. I was furious, but when I tried to say something, it was always the same response. Jason will figure it out. He just needs time. Time. That's all he ever seemed to get. Endless time and patience from my parents. Meanwhile, I was working my butt off and still getting grief if I came home late from work or if I didn't clean the house well enough. It didn't matter that I was the one contributing. To them, Jason was the one who deserved the support. I was just there. Things got really bad a couple of years ago. I had finally saved up enough to seriously start thinking about opening my business. I wanted to start a small cafe, a place with great coffee, local art on the walls, and a real sense of community. I had been planning it for years, sketching out ideas, working on a business plan in my spare time, and now I finally had enough saved to make it a reality. I was so excited to tell my parents. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud of me. I remember sitting down with them one evening after dinner. Jason was out, as usual, so I figured it was a good time to talk. I told them about my plans, how I'd been saving for years, how I wanted to make something of myself. My mom just nodded, and my dad barely looked up from his phone. Then my mom said something that hit me like a ton of bricks. "You know, your brother could really use some help right now. Maybe you could lend him some of that money you've saved?" I couldn't believe it. Jason? Help him? He wasn't working, wasn't even trying to get a job. What exactly did he need help with? Help him with what? I asked, trying to keep my cool. He's been talking about starting a business, too. Maybe you two could go in on something together? That's when I lost it. Jason hadn't been talking about starting a business. Jason hadn't been doing anything. He was still living at home, playing video games all day, and getting money from our parents whenever he needed it. And now they wanted me to hand over the money I had been working for years to save? I was livid. "No," I said, flat out. "I'm not giving him my money. This is for me. I've worked for this. Jason hasn't done anything to deserve it." That's when my mom got defensive. "He's your brother, Liam. Family helps each other out. You're being selfish. Selfish. That word stuck with me. I had been the one working, sacrificing, doing everything I could to get ahead, while Jason sat back and did nothing. And I was the selfish one? I left the room before I said something I'd regret, but I knew things were never going to change. My parents would always take Jason's side, no matter what. It didn't matter that I had been the responsible one, that I had been working toward a goal for years. In their eyes, Jason was the one who deserved everything. I was just an afterthought. The final straw came a few months later. I had been working extra shifts to save up the last bit of money I needed for the cafe. I came home late one night, exhausted, and went in my room to check on the lockbox where I kept my savings. When I opened it, my heart sank. It was empty. All $37,000 gone. I tore through my room, looking for it, thinking maybe I had hidden it somewhere else. But deep down, I knew what had happened. Jason had taken it. I confronted him the next morning, and he didn't even deny it. Mom and Dad said it was fine, he shrugged. They said you'd help me out. Help him out? By stealing everything I had worked for? I couldn't believe it. I stormed downstairs and confronted my parents. My mom just looked at me, completely unfazed. He's your brother, Liam, she said, as if that was supposed to make everything better. He needed it more than you did. I left that day and never went back. I couldn't be around them anymore. They had taken everything from me, and for what? To prop up Jason, the golden child who could do no wrong? Since then, I've been on my own, trying to rebuild my life. It hasn't been easy, but at least I'm not being dragged down by my family anymore. I'm still working toward my dream, though it's going to take me a lot longer to get there now. But I'll make it. I have to. I just can't rely on anyone but myself anymore. I thought it couldn't get worse after Jason took my $37,000 for himself with our parents' blessing, but I was wrong. The real kicker came about 6 months later, when my family's audacity reached an all-time high. After I left my parents' house and cut them off, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked extra shifts at my job, trying to rebuild what I had lost, hoping that one day I could get back to where I was before Jason and my parents ruined everything. Meanwhile, Jason was still living the high life at home, leeching off our parents like always. He didn't work. He didn't contribute. He just existed. And my parents were happy to keep coddling him. They bought him a new car a couple of months after I left. Nothing too flashy, but still, a car is a car, and Jason hadn't worked a day in his life to deserve it. I heard about it through a mutual friend who still lived in our old neighborhood. It hurt to hear that they were still bending over backwards for him, but I had bigger things to worry about. I had cut off contact with them, except for the occasional call or text from my mom, who tried to guilt-trip me into coming back home. I never responded to those messages. I wasn't interested in being this second-class child anymore. Then, out of the blue, one evening while I was sitting in my tiny apartment, my phone rang. It was my mom. I hesitated, thinking about letting it go to voicemail, but something made me answer it. Maybe I thought she was going to apologize. Maybe she'd finally acknowledge how unfair everything had been. I should have known better. Liam, we need to talk, she said, her voice tight with urgency. What is it, Mom? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I had no patience for another lecture about family duty or how I should forgive Jason. Your brother. He's looking to move out, she said. He found this amazing apartment in the city, right near downtown. You should see it. It's beautiful. But he doesn't have the deposit. He's really stressed about it. I felt my stomach knot up. I already knew where this was going. So, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. What does that have to do with me? Well, your father and I were thinking. She hesitated for a moment, then continued. You've been saving up again, haven't you? I know things were rough after everything that happened, but you've always been good with money. Maybe you could help him out? There it was. The audacity of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything they had already taken from me, after the $37,000 I'd worked for years to save, they wanted me to help him again? The golden child couldn't even scrape together enough for a deposit on his own? No, I said firmly. I'm not giving him anything. Not after what happened last time. You know that. But Liam, my mom's voice softened. taking on that familiar, manipulative tone she always used when she wanted something. He's your brother. He's family. Family helps each other out. Family helps each other out? I repeated, my voice rising. Where was that sentiment when Jason took everything I'd saved? When you told him it was okay to steal my money? I'm not helping him. She sighed heavily, like I was being the unreasonable one. You're being selfish again, Liam. It's just a deposit. You'll make it back in no time, I'm sure. But Jason really needs this. He's been through a lot, you know. Jason had been through a lot. Jason, who had never worked a day in his life. Jason, who had everything handed to him on a silver platter, while I had to fight for every inch. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, I said again. I'm not giving him anything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, my mom's tone changed. It got cold. You're going to regret this, Liam, she said quietly. Jason will remember that you weren't there for him when he needed you. You think you're so much better than him, but you're just bitter. Bitter and selfish. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. I was shaking with anger, my hands balled into fists. I couldn't believe the nerve of them, asking me to help Jason after everything he'd done, and then calling me selfish when I refused. It was like nothing I did would ever be good enough. I wasn't the golden child, so in their eyes, I was expendable. I was just someone they could use when it suited them. For weeks after that phone call, I didn't hear from my parents. It was almost a relief, not having to deal with their guilt-tripping and manipulation. But deep down, I knew they weren't done. Jason wasn't done. He was never going to stop leeching off them, and by extension, off me. Then one day, it happened. I came home from work one night and found a letter taped to my apartment door. It was from my landlord. My rent was overdue. But that didn't make any sense. I always paid my rent on time. I opened the letter and saw that a payment I had made earlier that month had been reversed. Panic set in as I realized what must have happened. I went straight to my bank the next morning to sort it out, and that's when I found out that someone had accessed my account and withdrawn nearly $3,000. I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. Jason. It had to be Jason. He had somehow gotten into my account, probably with my parents' help, and taken what little I had managed to save. Again, I immediately called my parents. My mom picked up on the second ring. Liam, she said, her voice annoyingly cheerful. How are you? We've been worried. What the hell did Jason do? I interrupted, not in the mood for pleasantries. He stole from me again, didn't he? Did you give him my account information? There was a pause, and then my mom sighed. He needed the money, Liam. You weren't willing to help, so we had to do something. You had to do something? I nearly shouted. You gave him access to my bank account? Are you insane? Calm down, she said, as if I was the one being unreasonable. It's just a few $1,000s. You'll make it back. You always do. I'm done, I said, my voice shaking with rage. I'm done with all of you. Don't ever contact me again. I hung up and blocked their numbers. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My own family had stolen from me, again, because Jason wanted to live in some fancy apartment he couldn't afford. And the worst part? They didn't even feel bad about it. To them, it was just money. Just something I could make back because I was the responsible one. Because I was the one who always landed on his feet. But not this time. This time, they had gone too far. I spent the next few weeks trying to pick up the pieces, working extra shifts to make up for what I had lost. But the emotional toll was even worse than the financial one. I couldn't believe my family, my own flesh and blood, had betrayed me like that. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, not after what they'd done. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from Jason. Hey bro, we need to talk, it said. I know you're mad, but this is important. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in hearing whatever excuse he had this time. But then, a few days later, I got another message, this time from an unknown number. Liam, it's Jason. I need your help. I'm in trouble. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After everything he'd done, he didn't deserve my help. But curiosity got the better of me, and I replied, What do you want? His response came almost immediately. I'm serious, man. I'm in deep shit. I took out a loan to cover the rest of the apartment deposit, but I can't make the payments. They're threatening to come after me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Jason had gotten himself into debt again, and now he was expecting me to bail him out? I'm not helping you, I replied. Figure it out yourself. Please, he begged. I'm going to lose everything. I don't know what to do. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to let him crash and burn, to let him finally face the consequences of his actions. But another part of me, maybe the part that still cared, despite everything, felt bad for him. But then I remembered what my mom had said all those months ago. Family helps each other out. Not anymore. After Jason's text begging for help with his loan, I tried to block everything out. I had done everything right. I had worked hard, saved my money, and built a plan for my future. It wasn't my fault Jason couldn't get his act together. I thought, maybe this time, my parents would finally understand that Jason was a lost cause. Maybe this time, they'd see that I wasn't responsible for cleaning up his messes. I should have known better. A week passed without any contact from Jason or my parents, and I started to feel a little more at peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't dealing with their constant demands or their endless guilt trips. But, as it always goes with my family, the peace didn't last. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a letter in my mailbox. It was from my dad. I was surprised. He rarely ever wrote or called. My mom was usually the one who handled all the family communications, but I guess this time was different. I opened the letter, my heart already sinking, knowing it couldn't be anything good. Liam, it started, in my dad's neat, blocky handwriting. Your mother and I have been talking, and we're very disappointed in how you've handled the situation with Jason. He's your brother. You know how much we've sacrificed for you both over the years, and we can't believe you would turn your back on family when we need you the most. I crumpled the letter in my hand. There it was again, this idea that I was the one letting them down. Never mind that Jason had stolen from me, lied to me, and put me in financial jeopardy more than once. To them, he was still the victim, and I was the villain. I forced myself to keep reading. We understand that you've worked hard for your savings, but Jason is in a difficult situation right now. The apartment deposit is just the beginning. He's got a lot of other expenses, and he's struggling to make ends meet. As his brother, you should be helping him, not turning him away. We've decided that if you're not willing to help Jason, then we're going to have to make some tough decisions. You're either part of this family, or you're not. If you choose not to help, then you won't be welcome here anymore. We've done everything we can to support you, and now it's time for you to do your part. I dropped the letter and sank into the nearest chair, stunned. They were threatening to cut me off, completely, if I didn't give Jason my money. After everything they'd already taken from me, after all the sacrifices I'd made, now they were willing to disown me over him. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Please come over for dinner tomorrow. We need to talk about this. We're a family, Liam, and we need to act like one. I didn't want to go. Every part of me wanted to just cut them off completely and move on with my life, but a part of me still felt like maybe, just maybe, I could get through to them. Maybe they'd finally understand where I was coming from. Maybe they'd see how unfair they were being. So, the next evening, I went. When I arrived at the house, everything felt strangely tense. My mom greeted me at the door, all smiles, like nothing was wrong. But there was a stiffness in the air that I couldn't ignore. My dad was sitting in his usual spot at the dining table, his arms crossed over his chest, not even bothering to hide the fact that he was angry. Jason, of course, wasn't there. We sat down for dinner, and for the first few minutes, no one said anything. My mom kept trying to make small talk, asking me about work, if I was eating enough, how my apartment was, but I could see the tension behind her smile. She was waiting for the right moment to bring up Jason. Finally, my dad spoke. We need to talk about your brother. I put my fork down, already bracing myself for what was coming. What about him? You know exactly what, my dad said, his voice low and serious. He needs help, and you're the only one who can give it to him. You've always been the responsible one, Liam. You've always been the one we could count on. That's why we're asking you to step up now. Jason's going through a rough time. He's always going through a rough time. I shot back, unable to hide my frustration. And I'm always the one who has to clean up the mess. He's your brother. My mom said softly, her eyes pleading with me. Family helps each other. We've helped you in the past. When? I snapped, finally letting my anger show. When have you ever helped me? I've been working since I was 15, saving every penny, and all you've ever done is take from me. Jason's the one you've always helped. He's the one you've coddled and supported, while I've had to fend for myself. My dad's face darkened. That's enough, he said, his voice sharp. You're not a victim here, Liam. We've done everything we could to raise you and your brother, and this is how you repay us? By turning your back on us when we need you the most? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were making it sound like I was the one who had abandoned them, like I was the one who had let them down. It was infuriating. I'm not turning my back on you, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm just not going to give Jason any more of my money. I've worked too hard for it. I have plans for my future, and I'm not going to throw it all away because Jason can't get his life together. You don't have a choice, my dad said coldly. Either you help your brother or you're out. We've already decided. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were actually giving me an ultimatum. Help Jason, or I was no longer part of the family. Are you serious? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. You're going to kick me out over this? My mom reached across the table, her eyes full of tears. Please, Liam, don't make this harder than it has to be. Jason needs you. We need you. Just help him, and everything will be okay. I pulled my hand away, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about my dreams, my plans, or everything I had worked for. All they cared about was Jason. I'm not giving him anything, I said, standing up from the table. If you want to cut me off, go ahead. But I'm not going to keep sacrificing my future for him. There was a long silence. My dad's face was like stone, his eyes cold and unforgiving. If that's your decision, he said slowly, then you're no longer welcome here. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I had always known they favored Jason, but I never thought they would actually go this far. I never thought they would choose him over me like this. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. My mom called after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was completely on my own. The weeks after that were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I had no contact with my family. No calls, no texts, nothing. I was devastated. Part of me had always held on to the hope that one day they'd see me for who I was, for all the work I had put in, for the sacrifices I had made. But now, that hope was gone. I tried to focus on my job, on rebuilding my savings, but it was hard. The weight of my family's betrayal was always hanging over me. I felt like I had lost everything. Then, one day, out of the blue, I got a text from an unknown number. Liam, it's Dad. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Part of me didn't want to reply at all, but another part of me, maybe the part that still held on to some shred of hope, wanted to hear what he had to say. What do you want? I finally replied. We need you to come home, he texted back. It's about Jason. That was all he said. Nothing about the ultimatum, nothing about what had happened between us. Just that they needed me, and it was about Jason. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. I didn't go to the house. I couldn't bring myself to face that place again. But I agreed to meet my dad at a coffee shop nearby. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a table, looking tense and uncomfortable. It wasn't like him. My dad was usually the picture of confidence, always in control of every situation. But today, he looked different. He looked worried. Thanks for coming, he said quietly as I sat down. I'm only here because you said it was about Jason, I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. What's going on? He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Jason's in trouble. Real trouble. He took out another loan. A big one. And now the collectors are after him. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of trouble? He's defaulted on the loan, my dad said, running a hand through his hair. And it's not just a small loan, Liam. We're talking tens of thousands. He can't pay it back, and now they're threatening to take him to court. He could lose everything. I couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, after all the money he had already taken, After all the chances he'd been given, Jason had screwed up again. And what do you expect me to do about it? I asked, my voice tight with frustration. I'm not giving him any money. My dad shook his head. It's not about the money. We've already paid off part of the loan, but it's not enough. We're asking you to come home to help us figure this out. We need you, Liam. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long trying to distance myself from my family, from Jason, from everything. But now, they were asking me to come back. I stood up, looking my dad in the eye. I'll think about it. The day everything finally fell apart started out like any other. I had been living in the family home for months since my last apartment lease had ended, mostly out of convenience, but also because, in the back of my mind, I had still hoped things might change. I had foolishly believed that, eventually, my parents would come to their senses. That maybe, just maybe, they'd see Jason for who he really was. But I was wrong. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in my room, going over some business ideas I'd been working on for months now. I had plans, big plans, to start my own business, something I had dreamed of for years. All the money I had been saving was supposed to go toward that. I wasn't going to waste another penny on anything else, especially not Jason's endless problems. Just as I was jotting down some ideas, there was a knock on my door. My mom entered without waiting for permission. She had that tight, fake smile plastered on her face, the one she always used when she was about to ask me for something. Liam, can we talk? She said, closing the door behind her. I already knew what this was about. We hadn't spoken much since the last blow-up over Jason's apartment deposit and the threats they'd made about cutting me off if I didn't help. They hadn't acted on those threats yet, but the tension in the house had been unbearable ever since. What is it, Mom? I asked, not bothering to hide the weariness in my voice. She sat down on the edge of my bed, her hands clasped in her lap. It's about Jason. Of course it was. It was always about Jason. He's in trouble again, Liam, she continued, her voice soft, as if she were delivering some heartbreaking news about a family tragedy. He's behind on rent, and he's struggling to make ends meet. You know how hard things have been for him since he moved out. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I told you, Mom. I'm not giving him any money. I need that for my business. She sighed, her eyes narrowing slightly. Liam, we've talked about this. You have more than enough saved. Jason just needs a little help to get back on his feet. It's what family does. No, Mom, I said firmly. Family doesn't take and take without giving anything in return. I've worked too hard for this money, and I'm not going to throw it away on Jason. Her face hardened. He's your brother, Liam. You owe him. We've supported you your whole life. Now it's time for you to support him. Owe him? I repeated, my voice rising. What exactly do I owe him for? For all the years he's gotten a free pass while I worked my ass off? For stealing the money I'd saved before? You can't be serious. I'm very serious, she snapped. This is about family. Your father and I have decided that if you're not willing to help Jason, then you're not welcome here anymore. There it was. The ultimatum. The threat they'd been holding over my head for months, finally out in the open. I felt my chest tighten with anger, but also with a strange sense of relief. At least now, I knew where we stood. I don't believe this, I said, standing up. You're really willing to throw me out over Jason? After everything he's done, after everything I've done for this family, you're going to kick me out because I won't give him my savings? This isn't about Jason, she said, standing up to face me, her voice sharp and cold. This is about you being selfish. You've always been so wrapped up in your own little world, thinking only about your future, your plans. But Jason is part of this family too, and he needs help. If you're not willing to be part of this family, then you can leave. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had always known, deep down, that my parents favored Jason, but to hear it said so plainly, so bluntly, it was like they had never seen me at all. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, feeling the weight of years of resentment, frustration, and anger boiling up inside me. I had given so much to this family, and all they had ever done was take. I had worked since I was a teenager, saved every penny, sacrificed my own dreams to keep the peace, and for what? To be thrown out like I was nothing. Just because I wouldn't hand over my hard-earned money to my lazy, entitled brother? Fine, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. If that's how it's going to be, then I'll go. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to actually call her bluff. Liam. No, I interrupted, cutting her off. You made your choice. I'm not giving Jason a single cent. If that means I'm out, then I'm out. I turned and started gathering my things. My laptop, some clothes, the few personal items I had scattered around the room. I didn't have much. Most of my stuff was still packed up from when I'd moved back in, thinking it would be temporary. I guess I'd been right. As I packed, my mom hovered by the door, still trying to talk me out of it. Liam, don't be rash. You don't have anywhere else to go. Where are you going to stay? You can't just leave. I'll figure it out, I said, stuffing the last of my clothes into a duffel bag. I've been figuring things out on my own for years. I'll manage. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, watching as I packed my life into a couple of bags. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her still wanted to control the situation, to manipulate me into staying and giving in to their demands, but another part of her must have known that she had pushed me too far this time. By the time I finished packing, my dad had come home. He stood at the bottom of the stairs as I came down with my bags, his expression stern and unyielding. You really think you can make it on your own? He asked, his voice low and full of disdain. Without this family? I've been making it on my own for years, I replied, not bothering to look at him as I passed by. I'm done with this. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say anything as I walked out the front door for what I knew would be the last time. My mom followed me to the driveway, still pleading with me to come back, to rethink my decision, but I was done. I threw my bags in the trunk of my car and got in. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, and for a moment, I just sat there, staring at the house I had grown up in, the house where I had spent so many years trying to be good enough, trying to earn their approval. But it was never going to happen. I realized that now. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I was never going to be Jason. I was never going to be the golden child, and I was okay with that. With one last glance at the house, I pulled out of the driveway and drove away. It wasn't until I was halfway across town that the reality of what had just happened finally hit me. I had nowhere to go. I had no backup plan, no friends I could crash with, and my savings, what little was left of it after Jason's last stunt, wasn't enough to get me into a decent apartment on such short notice. I pulled into a parking lot and sat there for a while, trying to figure out what to do. My phone buzzed with texts from my mom, begging me to come back, saying that they didn't mean it, that we could work something out. But I knew better. If I went back, it would be the same old story. They'd keep pressuring me, keep manipulating me, and I'd end up giving in. I couldn't let that happen. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I booked a cheap motel for the night, just to give myself a place to sleep while I figured out my next move. The room was small and dingy, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and apartment searches. I didn't have much luck at first. Most places were either too expensive or required a long-term lease that I couldn't commit to. But eventually, I found a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was cheap, and it was mine. I moved in a week later with nothing but my clothes and a mattress I'd bought secondhand. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the start of a new life. A life where I didn't have to answer to anyone, where I didn't have to constantly sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of Jason's endless failures. It was lonely at first. I didn't have many friends. Most of the people I had grown up with had moved away or drifted apart over the years. But I threw myself into my work, spending long hours at my job and pouring every spare minute into my business plan. The texts and calls from my parents eventually stopped. I guess they realized I wasn't coming back. Jason, of course, never bothered to reach out. He probably didn't even care that I was gone. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't have much, but I had my freedom, and that was worth more than anything they could have ever given me. When I drove away from my parents' house, my heart was heavy, but there was also an undeniable sense of freedom. I had no clear plan, just a couple of bags, my car, and the bit of savings I still had. But the most important thing was that I was done with the constant manipulation and guilt trips. I was finally out of their control. That night, after checking into the cheap motel, I made a call to my best friend, Ethan. We'd been close since high school, and he'd always been someone I could count on. He knew everything about my family, including how they treated me compared to Jason. When he picked up, I hesitated for a moment, wondering how to explain the chaos that had just unfolded. But before I could even get a word out, Ethan said, "Hey man, you okay? You sound off." "Not really," I admitted. "I'm out of the house for good. I couldn't take it anymore." I heard a low whistle on the other end of the line. "Damn, that's huge. You got somewhere to go?" I could feel the weight of the situation settle in. I didn't want to be a burden on anyone, least of all Ethan, but I couldn't avoid the reality that I didn't have a permanent place yet. "I was gonna find a place," I said, my voice tight with uncertainty. "But honestly, right now I'm just at a motel. I don't want to impose on anyone, but—" "Shut up, dude." Ethan cut me off with a laugh. "You're crashing at my place. My couch is your couch." No argument. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thanks, man. I'll figure things out soon, I promise." "Take your time," he said, his tone serious now. "I know how your family is. This is a big deal, and you're welcome as long as you need." So, the next morning, I packed up my few belongings and headed over to Ethan's place. He lived in a small apartment across town, and while it wasn't anything fancy, it was a hell of a lot more welcoming than my parents' house had ever been. Ethan was the kind of friend who never judged, never pressured. He just let me be, which was exactly what I needed at that moment. I spent the next couple of weeks living on his couch, using the time to sort through the mess of emotions and figure out my next steps. Ethan worked a lot, so I had plenty of time to myself to think. I started seriously planning my business again, something I hadn't had the mental space to do when I was under my parents' roof. I knew I needed to rebuild the money Jason had stolen, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually breathe and focus on my future. Of course, my parents weren't going to make it that easy. A couple of weeks after I left, I started hearing things, whispers from mutual friends, vague comments on social media. At first, I brushed it off. People talk, and I didn't care what they thought. But then, one day, I got a call from my cousin, Sarah. We hadn't been particularly close growing up, but we kept in touch every now and then. When I saw her name pop up on my phone, I wasn't sure what to expect. "Hey, Liam," she said, her voice tentative. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing some stuff about you. I thought you should know." I sighed, already feeling the weight of whatever was coming. "What is it, Sarah?" "Your dad's been telling people you abandoned the family. He's saying you walked out on them when they needed you the most, and that you've cut them off completely." I wasn't surprised. It was exactly the kind of thing my dad would say. Twist the truth to make me look like the bad guy while painting Jason as the innocent victim. "That's not what happened," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I didn't abandon them. They kicked me out because I wouldn't give Jason my money. I've been doing everything on my own for years, and I couldn't take it anymore." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "I figured something like that was going on. I just wanted to give you a heads up. People are starting to talk, and it's not looking good. You might want to set the record straight." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. It wasn't just my parents who were turning against me. It was the whole extended family. My aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had no idea what really went on behind closed doors were now forming opinions about me based on my dad's lies. It was frustrating, to say the least, but I decided not to engage. If my family wanted to believe the lies, let them. I was done trying to prove myself to people who had never seen me for who I really was. Over the next few weeks, the rumors grew louder. I started getting strange messages from distant relatives, some of them outright accusing me of being selfish, of leaving my parents in the lurch. I even heard from an old family friend who called to check in, but spent most of the conversation hinting that I should reconcile with my parents for the sake of family unity. But I wasn't interested. For the first time in my life, I was starting to understand what it meant to be free from their influence. It wasn't easy. Living with Ethan wasn't a long-term solution, and I still had to figure out where I was going to live. But I was determined to make it work. After about a month, I finally found a place. It was a tiny studio apartment in a rundown building on the outskirts of town, but it was mine. The rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. I moved in with nothing but a few bags and the mattress Ethan had lent me, but I didn't care. It wasn't about the space. It was about starting fresh. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor with a takeout pizza and a beer, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and excitement. The apartment was bare, the walls cracked and the floor creaking with every step, but it didn't matter. This was my space. No one could take that away from me. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work, both at my job and on my business plan. I spent hours researching, refining my ideas, and reaching out to potential investors. It wasn't easy. Starting a business from scratch never is, but I was determined to make it work. I wasn't going to let Jason or my parents hold me back anymore. They didn't reach out. Not once. After the initial flurry of rumors and accusations, my parents went radio silent. Jason, of course, never bothered to contact me at all. It was like I had been erased from their lives, and honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself. I wasn't trying to please anyone, wasn't living under the shadow of Jason's failures. It was hard, but it was also freeing. One day, while I was deep in the process of finalizing my business plan, I got an unexpected call from a former coworker, Amanda. We had worked together at the grocery store when I was saving up money in high school, and we had kept in touch off and on over the years. Amanda was one of those people who had always believed in me, even when I didn't fully believe in myself. "I heard you're working on something big," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I'm so proud of you, Liam. I always knew you'd make something of yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had been stuck in the cycle of trying to prove myself to people who didn't care, but here was someone who saw me for what I was trying to accomplish, without any strings attached. "Thanks, Amanda," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I'm still figuring things out, but it feels good to be working towards something that's mine." We chatted for a while, and by the time I hung up, I felt more motivated than ever. I had people who believed in me, people who supported me for who I was, not for what I could give them or how much I could sacrifice for someone else. As the months went on, I continued building my business, piece by piece. There were setbacks, of course. Funding fell through a couple of times, and I had to take on more shifts at my day job to make ends meet. But no matter how tough things got, I knew I was on the right path. I wasn't living in anyone's shadow anymore. One afternoon, as I was sitting in a coffee shop, working on some final revisions to my business plan, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Liam, it's Dad. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to reply, to see what he wanted, but the other part of me knew better. There was nothing he could say that would change what had happened. They had made their choice, and so had I. Without a second thought, I deleted the message. That night, as I lay in bed in my tiny apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I wasn't sure what the future held. My business was still in its early stages, and there was a long road ahead, but I was finally in control of my own life. No more guilt trips, no more manipulation, no more sacrificing myself for the sake of others. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I was happy.